2 o'clock, so we're going to get started. My name is Bill. I'm with Indivisible Chippewa Valley. Thank you for coming. We've got Beth Allman here today, who's going to be doing the training. She's from Dane County, and she's been doing a lot of this type of stuff outside of Dane County, trainings outside of Dane County, kind of bringing some of the lessons that they've learned from the city clerk's office in Madison to keep voter turnout high, because last year voter turnout in Wisconsin hit a 20-year low. But in the city of Madison, they didn't experience the same dip, and there's some things that they did that were a little more proactive, voter registration-wise, there that Beth has learned about, and she'll share that today. Indivisible, if you don't know who we are, we're just a grassroots group of volunteers. We do citizen engagement activities, letter writing, phone calling to elected officials, things like that. And voter assistance is one of the efforts we're going to be focusing on between now and the spring and fall elections. So if after this training you're interested in helping and getting involved in that, you send down a sign-up sheet, put your name and email address on there, and we'll be keeping you in the loop going forward. So Steve is taping Beth's training, so you can share this with others if you know someone who wasn't able to be here today. So without further ado, here's Beth. Also, give her credit because she's doing a double header today. We were in Menominee this morning, so she's, yeah, thank you.
Cool. Hi, everybody. So I'm Beth. How I got involved in this stuff is because I'm not with I'm with Indivisible Madison and the Wisconsin Progressive Alliance, but a lot of this I've put together on my own and learned about on my own. So, like many people after the 2016 election, I was looking for more ways to get involved. I had moved to Wisconsin from Illinois that fall, and I worked for a senior living company, and voter registration had always been something I did. So that was something I kind of picked to start with. And so this January, I started looking for what maybe senior centers would need to help register seniors. And it's kind of like going down the rabbit hole, if you will. So I was trying to find things that were already set up, but with all the law changes I was finding, most groups were trying to figure out how to adapt to the new laws and the new, life without the SRDs, the special registration deputies. So I just gathered up what I was finding and the information I was finding. I started with a training for my group, and I was asked if I could open it up so I've divided it into 2 sections. The first part is how to register voters now, and then the second part is all about the voting IDs and what IDs you need to vote. If you have a driver's license or an ID card, you're pretty much set, but we'll go into outliers. What you'll find is, 80% of people kind of fall into neat little categories and they won't have much trouble registering. You can either help them register online or you can help them register with paper forms, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about both ways. But it's that 20% of people, they're just lost. They don't fall into a neat category, and they take they take special effort to help them register to vote and to actually make it through the polls. And the more people that know the rules and know the procedures and know how to help people get through that process, the more people we can all help. So if you kind of think about it that way and think about the fact that, maybe you won't have a table where you're, if you're an old-fashioned SRD, you're used to kind of churning people out, where you sign off on the paperwork. It might not look exactly like that anymore, but really what we're fighting is misinformation and people who don't have the information. So if we're just giving our communities the resources they need to get through the process and kind of a friendly face they can keep going back to if they're running into barriers, that's the best thing we can do right now in the current situation. So we'll start with the general registration. You can still set up tables, so I've done a couple of practice to just kind of give better advice. and I'll set up a table somewhere, usually outside of an event or a fair, or 4th of July parade, something like that. And what I found is most people, I'm answering questions. They'll be like, I just moved here, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go, or I have this ID, does this ID work? What do I need to do differently? Or I just got married, I don't know if I re-register or not. And really being a face that can provide those answers is a lot of what I end up doing. And it's important to have correct information, and that's why it might look like a lot of handouts, but it's just so you can kind of refer back to them later, so you don't have to remember every single detail right now. And if you're talking to somebody in the community and they're like, well, I heard something different, you can hold us up and say, this is from the Wisconsin Election Commission, and this is the official document. And I think that's kind of what's lacking right now, is there's all these, well, I heard this and I heard that, and this website from 4 years ago says this, and I mean, even forms I've gotten at UW schools are a year or two old, which means they're completely outdated, basically, because they've changed so many things. So that's why I try to give out a form you can kind of like provide as a resource, and it also has most of the ones from the Wisconsin Election Commission has the links you can go to.
Is that a good website for those of us who need things electronically?
Yes, and I was delayed, but I have everything scanned in an email I can send to you now. So for the forms, but that website's really good for just any general questions that maybe I don't answer. There's a lot of information on the Wisconsin Election Commission's website, but it's all good information, and that's kind of the definitive place to go because they're the ones regulating the elections.
Is this 2017? Is that the date? There's no date on here.
There's not a date on those ones, but those are the most recent up-to-date ones. I've printed them all since January, so January is when the website went live and they got rid of the SRDs. So they're...
Beth, when you have your stations or whatever, do you have a laptop right there with you so you could actually register as you're going through, or no?
So I've done some practice ones, and most of the places I've done them didn't have Wi-Fi. So that's kind of what's difficult now, is you do have these two systems, so you can register people online, but you'll need Wi-Fi or some kind of internet connection. You'll need laptops or iPads or tablets. And that's doable for some groups. If you set up at the library, they'll let you use their Wi-Fi. If you're set up in a community center or a student center in a campus, they'll have internet access. You can register people online. And there's training from the League of Women Voters detailed on the website. But then if you're like in a park or on a parade route, you're not going to have, most people won't have internet. Some people have hotspots, but that's kind of an added expense. And honestly, I'll just have all my forms, not all, I don't want to overwhelm people. And I have paper forms. You can still help people with paper forms. You now have to send in a copy of proof of residency with a paper form. So that's what's changed there. So you may also run into the trouble you don't carry around a copy machine on you. So what I've kind of had to get away from being a perfectionist, and if I can get somebody 90% done where their form's complete, they know it's accurate, I've helped them with any questions, I'll bring envelopes, I'll bring stamps, I'll ask where they live, and then look up their city clerk's address, and I even like fill out the envelope for them. And then they have to go home and find some kind of proof of residency, which is the paperwork I just handed out, and actually put it in the envelope and mail it. And yes, 100% of people won't do it, but you're not, with just paper forms and no internet, you're not going to get them any closer necessarily. So you kind of have to be willing to not have that satisfaction of knowing it's 100% done. But a lot of what I found is just people need answers and they need correct information, and if you're providing that service, you're probably helping them much more than anything else you could be doing. So if you look at the 2 pages, they're just information on what you can use to prove residency. So if you kind of think about it, when you're registering people, you're really only proving where they live, and that's all you really care about at that time is proving, that they're at the correct address that they want to vote at, and making sure they have some kind of documentation that the city clerk's going to take. When they go to vote, they need to prove who they are, but that address on their driver's license doesn't necessarily have to be correct. So a lot of times that's some of the misinformation you'll see is, I've heard people say, you need a driver's license, a copy of it to register to vote. That's not accurate. You can use it. It's one of the forms of ID, but it doesn't have to be a driver's license to register to vote. So just think, registering to vote, proving residency. Voting at the polls, proving identity. And you do want to make sure when you're registering somebody that they will be able to vote when they go to the polls, but you don't need to submit that to register to vote. Clear as mud, kind of.
How do you know if somebody's lost their privilege of voting
So you mean like for a felony
or
or guardianship?
guardianship or that kind of thing?
Guardianship's a little... I would contact if you have like a disability resource center around here, because that law I believe did also change. There was an older law that said if you had any guardianship paperwork, if somebody was signed up to be your guardian because you needed help with certain things or certain legality things, that you couldn't vote unless you went through all these hoops. I have heard anecdotally that law did change, but it's hard to find an accurate resource online. So basically, I would find a disability resource local to this area and see what they recommend, because I know the people I talked to in Madison say that that's no longer the case, but I think sometimes it's county by county. I don't know if that helped, but...
But I mean, you just flat out ask somebody that you think maybe isn't able to vote, are you sure you're able to vote, or how do you ascertain whether there's any point in registering them?
I mean, I guess so. Like thinking for somebody who I'm not going to ask everybody that comes to my table if they have a felony, for example,
Yeah.
and they're still on paper. But I kind of am trusting the person that they will tell me that. And if you send in the registration paperwork and there's a problem for some reason, the clerk usually catches that and sends a letter to the person. So I know for felonies, for example, the Department of Corrections every election cycle will send a list of people at that polling place that cannot vote due to current felonies, and those people will be like marked in the polling book that they can't vote. So I know for felonies, that's what happens.
Same thing for guardianship?
I don't know of a governing board that would keep an accurate list. So it could be that unless somebody self-identifies as having a guardian, nobody would ever know if that they have an issue. So does that help at all?
Sure.
So for registration, so some tips and tricks we've found. Our city clerk in Madison, she will take proof of registration by email. So sometimes that solves the problem of how to get a copy. You can take a screenshot on your phone. You'll find with a lot of young people, they no longer have paper bills or paper bank statements. So some of them run into issues with having like a piece of paper with their legal address on it. So you'll find a lot of details like this and tricks vary municipality to municipality. So the best thing to do is to start becoming best friends with your local clerk and find out what they'll let you do and what they won't. So ours will take things by email. In theory, any clerk should be able to take proof of residency by email. They all have email addresses given to them for their job. Some, it's a little bit of extra work, so they won't do it. So Milwaukee, for example, I've called their office. They'll take a few at a time. They didn't give me a specific number, but they don't want to be inundated with emails with proof of residency. Ours will take as many as we send, and she'll literally just get the email, get the paper registration form, match them in her office, and register that and put that person in the system. So I'd recommend you reach out to your municipal clerk, because that is a way that you can register them completely on the spot. If you run across somebody who looks at this list and they say, I don't have any of these things, I'm new here, I don't have any way to prove where I live, you can have them send in the registration form. The clerk will send them a letter to the address they register on that says you forgot to send in proof of residency. And that letter, since it's from a government agency, counts as proof of residency, so you can just send it back. Yeah, so that's a fun trick too. I mean, that is a possibility you could use too if you set up a table and you just fill out the forms and your clerk might not be very happy with you that they have to send so many letters out, but it is kind of a way around it. Any questions on that part?
So the utility bill, they would take just a paper copy off an internet site for a utility bill?
Yeah,
Or
if
does it
you...
have to be the actual bill that comes in the mail?
No, if you print it off, that should
You can just
work.
print it- you can
Yeah.
print it off.
Like you can print off a bank statement as long as it has your address on it. So
Address and name?
and name, yes.
And then- okay.
And the name should match what is on your ID. And we'll go into name changes later, but they're basically going to look at whatever you name you register under, and you're going to have something that shows that same name and proves who you are. So.
And you could have an electronic image of a utility bill as well, like a screenshot you were saying.
My clerk will take it, and all clerks, in theory, should take it.
Okay.
In practice, not all will. But I've been told by my clerk that there's no reason they cannot be accepted digitally. There's like no law against it, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might run into that with students more because they might not be able to produce a physical piece of paper. They can always print it off, but you'll have to do that at home. So that's proof of address. So then a question that comes up then next is, how do I know what polling place to vote at? And that's more in particular for students, if you're helping students vote, or new residents to the area. So this form will kind of help you figure out if somebody's moved within Wisconsin, which polling location they should register at. And this is another one you may see conflicting numbers about because it was they tried to change it and it was challenged legally and shot down. It is you must live at a location for 10 consecutive days and declare that it's and have it be your residency, like intend to stay there and live there. So for most people who have just moved to an area, you either are living there permanently or you're not. But for students, it's a little bit more of a gray area. We had a lot of good questions earlier, about students who come from Illinois or Minnesota. How do they choose where to vote? And for students, it's honestly a lot of times up to them and how they word things. If they say, my parents' home, I want that to be my permanent residence. It's where I'll be going back to after the semester. They can register and vote at that location. If they say, you know what, I'm a student here, but I'm fully part of the community. I really like it here. They can register in their dorms or an apartment on campus. So they can really pick either one. They just cannot vote at both locations. Mm-hmm.
What about homeless?
We'll get to that. Yeah.
Maybe I didn't hear what you said, but you can be registered at two places. You can just only vote at one. Is that correct?
There's nothing illegal about being registered in more than one place. The illegality is voting in more than one place. So you don't have to scramble to make sure you're unregistered at your home address before registering. It's kind of the burdens on the state to remove you from one place when you've moved. I mean, you can be nice and try to tell them hey, I'm moving. It's not on you if that particular municipal clerk doesn't ever remove you. What I've been told since I moved here from Illinois, I actually did call my local clerk there and say, how do I unregister? And they said if I filled out a change of address with the post office, a copy of that goes to the local clerk. This is what they told me in practice. I don't know how effective it is. So that's, in theory, how they catch people who have moved, if you fill out a change of address.
Okay.
So, So yeah, so if you're helping students vote, you can basically say, would you like to vote on campus? Are you voting at your parents' place? And just keep in mind that they will have to have proof of residency for whichever place they're voting at. So,
Just to clarify, they can't be registered at home and registered at school. Can they be?
there's nothing illegal about being registered in two places. Because if they decide to register on campus, they don't have to wait to be unregistered at their parents' house. If you move, I mean, it's true for anybody. Like, if you moved to Green Bay tomorrow, you don't have to wait to be unregistered in Eau Claire.
No, but they can't be registered in both places, so they can pick and choose. If I'm home, I can vote at home, or if I'm at school, I can vote at school. Can they?
You should really be registering wherever, you should really be voting wherever you've most recently registered at. So how it ideally should work is, say they move here, they vote. If they want to go back home and then vote at home, they should re-register at their parents' house again. So every time you move, you should register again. You can't like be registered in two places and then like vote and then go back and vote. And,
Right, that's what I was thinking. You shouldn't do that.
yeah.
Huh?
That's the jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're only voting once in an election, I don't know that there wouldn't even be any red flags. So, but it's still not what you want to do. So, and you want to advise students accordingly. Yeah, where you run into trouble, like students can't, say be registered in Minnesota and vote for like the Minnesota senator and then the governor here. You can't like pick and choose. There's actually there's somebody from Wyoming who got in trouble. He had a summer home in Kansas, and he'd vote locally in Kansas and then federally in Wyoming, and they did not like that. So yeah, pick a place, just one ballot. You can think of it that way. And definitely no absentee ballot in one place and physically at the polls in another. Like, that's also definitely illegal. But yeah, so for students, you'll basically just talk them through. Do you want to vote here? Do you want to vote at your parents' house? Give them the information how to register at either location. And there's like a pretty good guideline that got handed out for that on how to kind of pick which place. And no, I've not heard of one single case of someone being asked to justify, well, why did you register here? Can you, is this your residency? Because it's pretty easy to say, I've lived in my dorm room for 10 days. I intend to be a member of this community. You're kind of talking intention at that point. So.
Did everybody get the how to register students handout?
No, pardon.
No, here it is.
Oh, can you pass that?
Which way is it going?
It should be going that way, I believe.
We already got it.
We didn't get it up here.
Okay, yeah.
Guide to student residency.
Got it.
You got it? Okay. You need it?
Yes, we
Okay.
need it.
Send it up.
Any other questions on the residency aspect and how to pick where you're registering? Most people will be pretty easy. They'll be like, oh, I'm in this apartment or I'm in this home. So most people it won't be a big issue for. So then we start getting into the fun exceptions for registration. So the two coming around, I'll start with name change. Predominantly, you'll see this if somebody gets married or gets divorced. And what you want to keep in mind is their name should be consistent across kind of like government bodies. Think of it that way. So if they've updated their name at the DMV and they've updated their driver's license, they also need to be voting under their new name. If they just got married and the election's in 4 days and nothing's updated, tell them to vote under their former name. Because basically they're going to check your ID, and the name on your ID needs to match what's in the poll book, needs to match what the clerk has. So you want it to be consistent. And that's a question that does come up pretty often is, how do I change my name and when do I change my name? Basically if they've updated it other locations, they need to you're basically just updating your name. And on the You can change this pretty easily online. The website we go to for voter registration online is myvote.wisconsin.wi.gov, and that's kind of the one-stop shop for all voting needs in Wisconsin. If you are registering people online, you can go there. They can change their name, they can change their address if they already have a current record in the system. If the person, for some reason, can't change it online, you can use the paper forms. There's a box to check that just says name change. You could be weird like me and tell your boyfriend you refuse to get married within 3 months of an election, but most people won't do that, so. Yeah, so that's kind of the common thing with name changes. Any questions on that one? That's one of the more straightforward ones, unfortunately. So then the next form you have is for homeless voters. Let me get a reference line for this. So basically, I'm going to take that one, just hit reference. So this will kind of walk you through both the aspect of registering someone who's homeless, and you still need to prove who you are with some kind of identification, even if you're homeless when you vote. So the registering, there's a list there of items they can use to register. As someone pointed out earlier, most people who are homeless would not have a utility bill or, a real estate tax bill or paycheck, things like that. They probably don't have most of the ones on this list. The most common one I've seen used is an affidavit from a social service agency. So what they'll have to do is go to like a homeless shelter or some other agency that's giving them aid and ask for a letter on letterhead from somebody that works there that says, I attest this person uses this address as residency for voting. They don't even necessarily have to sleep in that location. So, it's just wherever they're kind of claiming residency for voting. So,
Can that be like a library?
the location that they're claiming?
Yeah.
So it's basically what they'll do is it's whatever location they are stating they're going to at night consistently. So on the paper registration forms, there's even like a little cross section where you can put like the intersection of two roads and say that you return to the park bench on like 1st and 3rd every night. So if the location they return to at night is the bench outside of the library, you could put the library's address.
It has to be a location where they sleep though, not some, like a community table where they would go eat dinner or something like that every day.
So if you look at this side of it, let's see. It says homeless individuals may designate a fixed location as their residence for voting purpose. This location may be a homeless shelter, a park bench, or other location where a homeless individual may spend time or return to on a regular basis. So I guess it could be then. You'll find a lot of the laws, there's maybe some room for interpretation, which sometimes works in our favor, but sometimes doesn't. But I believe, and that's again why I hand out the forms, is because then you could take it and say, well, it says this here, so the person comes here regularly, why can't they use this address? So once they've used that to prove where there's a location they're returning to regularly, they still do need photo ID to vote at the polls. What you'll find is if somebody is maybe more recently homeless, they still have an ID card from before, an old driver's license or an old ID card that they can use. Because I think Wisconsin, they're good for like 8 years, right? So if somebody's only been homeless in the last 4 years, they may still have another 4 that their license is good. Also, we'll get more into this later, but a Wisconsin license can be expired since the last general election, and it can be accepted at the polls. So even if it's slightly expired, they can still use that to vote. Like I said, we'll get more into that later. But honestly, a lot of this stuff, the best service we can provide is kind of like a consistent face to walk someone through the process. Because in Dane County, there's a Dane County Voter ID Coalition that helps people get IDs. And what they've found pretty regularly is that if like a homeless person goes in by themselves, they'll just kind of be shooed away. But if somebody from a more official capacity goes in with them, that they'll be taken a little more seriously. Especially if you have, like I said, like a piece of paper that says, look, you have to do this. So does that kind of make sense? We'll also get into more details in the second part about how to get free ID if you don't have ID.
So Beth, under how do I get a photo ID for the homeless, it says that you have to show X number of things, proof of identity, legal presence, and residency. That letter then would act as residency?
I believe so, yeah.
Because otherwise,
'Cause you're
if you're
puberty-
homeless, how can you prove residency?
Right. You're using it to prove residency for voting, so they should also accept it to get the ID.
Okay.
And that's where they might need kind of a helping hand. We'll talk about the DMV also at that end. How many people have registered voters in the past? A lot. Everybody a former SRD?
Former clerk.
Former clerk? Oh, cool. We'll start with the ex-felons first. So in Wisconsin, if you are off paper, which means you've completed your sentence, your probation, and your parole, your voting rights are restored and you can vote again. I found that the majority of people, whether they've committed felonies or not, have no idea that felony voting rights are ever restored. It's state to state, so there's not one law regulating all of the U.S., so I think it's one of those things you'll come across that they may have heard information that applied to a different state. So so off paper is the term most ex-felons are familiar with, so you can use that terminology and they'll know exactly what you're talking about, but what it means is they're done with their sentence, their probation, and their parole. And then you can just help them register like anybody else. The biggest barrier here is that most felons just don't know they can vote. So for all of these things, the best advice I can give is find something you're passionate about or that you have experience in, and then kind of focus on that, because there's obviously so many areas you could go into. It can be a little overwhelming, but for example, myself, since I worked with seniors in the past, I'm a little familiar with senior living homes. That's kind of my comfort zone. And trust me, there's a lot of work to do in each area. So if you have experience working with ex-felons in the past, or maybe one group I was in, one of them was a correctional officer, so she knew a lot of parole officers, and she decided she wanted to kind of counsel her peers. So kind of think about what skills you might have that you can kind of tap into, or who you know that you could tap into. Because a lot of this, it's mainly just education. So what I've come across is, so I worked with somebody who'd done a lot of voter registration in the past, and he was knocking doors. He got to somebody who was kind of like embarrassed. He said, oh, I can't register to vote. And after they talked for a while, it was because he was a felon. And the guy found out he was off paper. And he's like, oh, no, I can register you right now. You can register. And the guy, once he believed it, he actually started crying because he thought he could never vote again. And so that story always kind of reminds me that when it's easy to vote. We take it for granted sometimes, but the people we may be working with who are having a hard time, a lot of them are just so appreciative to get somebody willing to help them. So it's always kind of like a story I like to go back to. So if you, what I found in this situation is not only the ex-felons don't know they can register, but a lot of, it never really comes up in the process of like kind of reintegrating to the community. So it's not, I mean, there's so many things to go over, how to get a job, where you can live, that the right to vote isn't really covered. So sometimes you can talk to groups that help former felons reintegrate into a community. And like, for example, we have one in Dane County, Urban Ministries, and they said we can set up a table at their job fair with information on voting for former felons. Or you can talk to probation officers and make sure that they include that as part of their reintegration process. But sometimes it's kind of thinking outside the box, like, okay, how can I connect to this population? So, any questions on that one? Mm-hmm.
It's probably not related, but can ex-felons who are off paper then own guns again?
That I have no idea about.
Okay.
That might be like a
That's what
whole,
we're talking about,
yeah.
but it would occur to me
I
that-
don't think so.
Okay, so maybe that's why they think that their rights aren't restored.
It could
because
be.
some are restored and some aren't.
Right.
I mean, I think sometimes it's, you get information from other states. So for example, there was a problem in 2016 where there was information on Facebook and online that teenagers could vote in the primary if they were 17, as long as they were 18 by the election. And that is not the case in Wisconsin. That is illegal. So you had 17-year-olds, they saw it on Facebook from their friends in other states. They voted in Wisconsin, and they initially were actually like, charges were brought against them. I believe they've all been dropped since then, but imagine being 18 and that's your first experience voting, is like having to go to the county courthouse and getting in big trouble. So
Did they have to show ID when they were 17?
mm-hmm.
And they still let them vote?
Mm-hmm. So it maybe, I mean, I think maybe it's more the responsibility of the election official, speaking as an election official, that should have been caught, and maybe the wrong people in that situation were reprimanded, but that's still kind of how it played out. So, but yeah, there's a lot of laws voting-wise that are different state to state, and with social media can be very challenging to make sure our communities are informed about the right rules. So, and if people are also social media fans, we can all play a part in putting correct information out on social media and making sure we specify it's for Wisconsin. I'm a big harper on Twitter about my vote. So, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say I'm an English teacher. No one's ever an ex-felon or a former felon. It's a word like graduate. Once you're a felon, you're a felon.
Okay.
So it's a felon who, I'm sorry to be so.
No, that's
I'm a felon, thank you. So it's a felon who can vote, but you're all, you know, there's no such thing as a former felon or.
Is there such a thing as an ex-spouse?
Oh, yeah. Another word for that.
the terminology comes from the paperwork. So,
Right.
yeah. And then some of the social justice groups even don't like ex-felon for other reasons. So I found it's kind of like the common understanding word. So
Exactly, sure.
speaking of making up phrasing, but there was another. Okay. So the next form, is, sorry about the sloppy handwriting too for the, is more for seniors voting. And honestly, I think we hear a lot about students being disenfranchised and maybe people who are low socioeconomic status or people of color being disenfranchised. But honestly, seniors who are disabled or in homes are one of the biggest groups, I think, that are not being able to vote. Because if you think about it, if you live in a nursing home, you don't have any family, maybe you're 95 years old, you're in a wheelchair and don't have a car or a driver's license, how do you get photo ID if yours is expired? And how do you know how to navigate the system even? How do you keep up with the laws changing? So I think there's definitely, if that's anyone's passion in here, there's definitely a lot of work that can be done around it. So let me grab my copy. So one of the first things to know is if you have somebody who's indefinitely, or who's basically homebound, has a very, very difficult time leaving their home, there is a process in Wisconsin for, they're considered indefinitely confined voters, just meaning that they can't leave their homes easily. You register to vote. You have to submit a copy of your ID, your photo ID. So it'll be a little difficult if you don't have one in the first place. But once that's on file, as long you will be sent automatically every election. You'll be sent absentee ballots for spring primaries every election. As long as you are returning them, you will keep getting ballots, and you don't need to update your ID. But if you miss even one, you're taken off the list, and you have to start over and re-register and provide new photo ID if it's, too expired. So, so if you say fall, break your hip, you're in the hospital during an election, and you miss turning in your ballot, you'll have to start the process over with a broken hip too. So, but it's still a system most people don't know about.
What do you do about photo ID if they can't leave their facility to get one?
It's a very good question. So, if they're in a nursing home, I think there's special exceptions. But if they're in their own home, I don't think they qualify for those. That's my understanding. Does anybody have other? Yeah. So if they're indefinitely confined at home, and they miss a ballot, and they have to re-register and go through the process, and their ID is no longer usable, they do have to resubmit a new valid ID. So.
If they've applied for indefinite confinement in a assisted living, for example, if they shift address, move to another place in the facility, for example, will they continue to receive absentee ballots? Does the clerk need a new proof of identity?
So facilities are a whole nother ball game.
Where I ran into this is it's a portion of my town that has subsidized housing.
Okay.
Move across the street, go down to vote, you can't vote. I'm wondering if there's anything special about the indefinite confinement absentee ballot rules that might make it easier for those people to continue to receive ballots, even though they might move within the territory.
I think if you move, you're still supposed to re-register. I mean, because the ballots are going to be sent to whatever address, like even if you're in an apartment and you put down 4D, they're going to be set to 4D. If you move like 2 floors up, they're still going to go to your old mailbox. You have to have a way to get them. So, and for an assisted living, it'll be different, but so for indefinitely confined voters, though, that's like an area of opportunity to target agencies that maybe are visiting homebound people. So you can contact local Meals on Wheels and say, do you mind handing out this information to your clients? You can talk to home health companies. You can talk to even a lot of libraries have book delivery services. You can contact them and ask, can I just put information on voting from home in with your books from time to time. So there's a lot of like little tricks you can try out to make things easier, because then you hit all of their clients as opposed to you trying to find each one individually. So
this isn't related necessarily to older residents, but in here it says that overqualified for a non-expiring Wisconsin ID. Do Wisconsin IDs, I know driver's license do, but Wisconsin IDs expire too?
Yes,
Apparently, yes.
8 years.
That's the same,
I have an ID, not a driver's license, luckily for you.
oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
Thank you,
for,
Catherine.
for an older adult, the driver's license is likely to be expired, correct? For a lot of these people, 8 years? But
What you run
otherwise
in-
they can use that, and
Yes.
their license. But if it expires, how long would they have to use it after it expires?
So you can use an expired ID as long as it expired since the last general election. So for our next batch, so like spring and the fall, it can be expired since November 8th, 2016. So,
Isn't the spring election called the general election?
It's called a spring election.
no,
So that's what we call it, a spring election.
Yeah.
I think they mean more like a federal versus a state. You can kind of think about it that way.
But it's you're saying general election is specifically a federal election? What
That's
you're saying?
my understanding of it. The terminology used on the state forms is general election, so
Okay. So you're saying a year from November?
that's my understanding of it, yes.
I think Wisconsin's elections in the spring are called spring elections, right on the thing they call it.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not called a general election.
Okay.
I just looked at the law about referendums, and they have to be posted to the next general election. So the statewide referendum on removing the treasurer from a state office is going to appear on the spring general election.
Huh.
That's why I say that. I could be wrong, but
If anybody wants to volunteer to use their smartphone to, there's a form I'll be passing out. It looks like it's acceptable voter ID for voting in Wisconsin, and that has the date of what they call the last general election. So if it was updated to the spring that just passed, then we'll know one way or another.
It's 2018. My vote says 2018 spring election. My vote at WI.gov.
It is the next one coming up, you mean?
No, I'm just looking at something different as far as what
the
the spring,
terminology.
yeah, what they call the spring election.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I'm
whether
on
it's
the-
considered a general election or not might be a completely different question.
I'm on the Elections Commission website, it says spring election.
That's how it was explained to me by my clerk. So they might use terminology different even in that niche of a situation. So you'll find it's a little confusing for some reason. So, the other thing you run into, and I always push people who are well-informed and passionate and really want to help people vote to become election officials and election observers, is a lot. So this is like my 7th class, or 8th, I guess now today. And I've gone around most of southern Wisconsin at this point, and the number of people I've run into who could have voted, but a misinformed election official that turned them away is astounding. So, I mean, I've had people with IDs that were expired within a reasonable period of time be told they couldn't vote. And most people in their free time don't learn this much about elections, so they trust the election officials. Most people don't realize to be an election official you attend a 1-hour PowerPoint presentation, and there's no test at the end to verify that you absorbed all the information. So you could be texting under the table the entire time and just be like, yeah, I got it, and go be an election official. Which, I mean, that's just the way the system's set up. So I always pitch people who care about helping others vote to become election officials and election observers. Because if you have really good, passionate people in there, they might say, like, if you have an issue, let me help you. You know, do you have a passport at home? Do you have a veteran's ID? Like, they'll help you troubleshoot. If somebody's maybe not on that page, we'll just say, like, this ID doesn't work, you can't vote. So you kind of see there's a big difference there. So.
Beth, you say your area is with seniors. I just have a question.
Mhm.
Is there any regulation about a senior who has a home address but has moved into a long-term care facility? Do they have to do a change of address for that? If, I mean, their mail goes to the long-term care facility, would that be the?
I would say, well, is the home still in their name?
Well, for a lot of seniors, they do keep the home in their name
I'd
at
say-
least for a period of time, but it's not necessarily where their residency is any longer.
Do they plan to return there?
Yeah, I'd say you could argue that one. Because the other thing you have to keep in mind is that, like, a lot of, like, if they get absentee ballots at their home and somebody's bringing it to them and helping them, like...
But if they don't get it at their home, which most don't, they have their mail coming to the new residency,
Mhm.
long-term care, what kind of, I don't even know what oversight there would be for that.
Most like
Other-
a student who lives in the dorms, who keeps a permanent residence at their home, but lives.
That's what I'm asking, does it apply to seniors the same way?
When we registered at the nursing home, and some of you are here that did that, essentially what we got was just a printout from the nursing home verifying that this was their permanent address, and we had used that as proof of residency. So it was not a problem. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, are you thinking that if somebody moves to assisted living, it might be hard to prove they live there? Or...
No, I'm saying that even the factor of having to change, I would imagine there's a lot of people in senior residences of some sort that don't think they have to change their residency.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
What would be the advice you would give someone? Is that necessary for them to do that? Or is that in their best, it is necessary.
So what you're supposed to do is anytime you move, you are there's certain laws that you're supposed to like update your address with the state anyway. So like, say any one of us moved, you're supposed to change your address and get a new license within a certain number of days. Most people don't, but you're supposed to. So the argument would be if they're moving to assisted living, they should be updating their address anyway.
Okay.
So I think if they're keeping the home and they're not selling it, because most people you're going from one place to another, you're not like, you don't have two places. I think if they're keeping the home, some people could argue, well, I intend to go back there at some point. Whether that's realistic or not, that's another story.
Who are they supposed to update it with, the DMV or the county clerk?
For, I know like if I moved, it's supposed to be that I'd update it with the DMV and get a new license. People don't actually always do that. That's what's supposed to happen. If you move and you want to vote at your new place, you're supposed to re-register with the clerk. So,
I think if there were Social Security involved, which probably there would be, and you've changed your address with the Social Security administration.
yeah, I would say you wouldn't want like your Social Security to be at one place and your voting to be at another place and your Medicare address to be another. You know, like you'd want it to be consistent, kind of like changing your name. But so going on to kind of the voting from a nursing home or a facility. So what the law is, and a lot of facilities themselves don't, that I've come across, don't necessarily know this. If you have 5 registered voters in a facility, you have 1 requesting an absentee ballot, and the facility requests assistance from the clerk's office. Legally, they are supposed to provide somebody to go to that building and help them vote. To vote on election day.
What about registration?
Since we have same-day registration, they can help them. And that person, so this actually threw me off for a really long time, but they're a special voting deputy, and those still exist. And they are trained by the clerk's office, and my understanding is that they are considered like a clerk, kind of like an election official. They're considered an employee of the clerk, so they don't need like a copy of a proof of residency when they're registering them. That's my understanding. This one, it's really hard to find accurate information. Like literally, this is all that's on the Wisconsin Election Commission website. And since this was my passion, I searched and searched for information. So I'm sorry if this is even a little like lacking, but this is literally all our state even provides. And I've read through the election laws also. So it's
So if you have 5 registered and 1,
so if your facility has 5 people registered to vote there, 1 requests an absentee ballot, and your facility requests assistance from the clerk's office, they're supposed to send somebody to help. And that's another position you can volunteer for if you want to help out people on election day.
how far ahead would they have to do that? Is there a law about that?
I don't know that it specifies.
Does it have to be on election day?
The assistance, you mean?
Yeah.
I think it's technically an absentee ballot, so those
Yeah.
have to be
I want to say, because I looked into doing it,
Friday before the election.
Yeah.
I think they had set up different times and they weren't all on election day.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so a lot of facilities don't necessarily know that. So, a group in Kenosha I was working with, they set out to find all of the senior facilities in their county, and you can go to the Wisconsin Department of Public Health, and they should have a list of facilities. And then I know for my clerk, you can request a list of facilities they already go to, so that way you're not calling ones repeatedly that they already help. So then kind of by process of elimination, you'll have a list of ones that are not receiving help. So you can even call and say like, hey, did you know this exists? Would you like me to drop off information? Would you like me to have a voter registration drive so that you can get 5 registered seniors there? And you can kind of go from there. Working in senior care, I can tell you that the response you get is going to be varied because each building's dedication to helping seniors vote is only as good as the staff that works there. Because for my building, I would mail letters to the families, hey, can you, and this is Illinois, we only fill out 1 piece of paper and there's no voter ID. So it's a little bit different. I would send a copy of the registration form to my families. I had it at our concierge desk so that residents could pick it up. I put a sign in the lobby. I would, go around to people I knew who cared about it. And then our center was a polling place, so they didn't have to go anywhere. We had almost everybody in our assisted living registered. I eventually took a position where I traveled. We had 18 locations in Illinois. I went to one a week before the primary in 2016, and they didn't even have anything set up to take people to the polling place. So it really varies according to the staff that works there. I mean, if you have staff that don't even vote themselves, they're not even going to think about it. They're not even going to know when elections are. So some will be like, oh, that's a great idea. They just don't realize when stuff is because they don't think about it. Others will view it as more work and be like, yeah, call me back another time or talk to this other person. So generally the best people to talk to are the executive director of the facility or the activities director. So the activities director is usually the one that drives the bus places. So if they have to drive to another polling place, they'd be the one setting that up anyway. At that location, I ran into a lot of people who did not realize to vote at that local polling place, they needed to be registered at that assisted living facility. So they were still, kind of like you were talking about, they were still registered at that home. They're still mobile. They get on the bus to go vote. They are not registered at the polling place there, so they cannot vote. In Illinois, actually, they might have same-day registration, but I'm not sure, actually. But
How do you explain this last clause here about having to surrender their driver's license to a senior who isn't?
So
that offends me, actually.
So for that one, that's only if they're not intending to drive at all ever anymore. So you'll run into people who they're moving into a home, they won't have their car, they maybe broke their hip and they can't physically drive anymore. And you can tell them, okay, your license is eventually going to expire and we want to make sure you have a way to identify yourself and you don't want to wait at long lines in the DMV. There's the stereotype about the DMV most people culturally will understand. So you can explain, like, let's go now while you're still feeling well and while you're still healthy, and we'll get you this ID that never expires. Sometimes that works, but again, driver's license can be a very touchy issue. So.
Really touchy issue.
The ID does expire.
So there's a special ID if you're a U.S. citizen, a resident of Wisconsin, and over 65, you qualify for a non-expiring Wisconsin ID. You have to meet those criteria. The normal Wisconsin ID does expire. So, but to get this ID, you have to hand over your driver's license, and then you're handing over your driver's privilege too. So, I would think you probably could go back and say, hey, I decided that I want to drive again. You'd probably have to pass a driving test and a vision test. You'd probably have to basically kind of start from scratch. So, yes, the conversation's challenging, and that's going to vary person to person, but just know that that's out there. So,
Yeah, thanks.
yeah. So the rules would also apply to residential care apartment complexes or adult family homes certified by the state. So it might help with more than just seniors, you know. So just kind of keep that in mind too. Any questions on that stuff? I will say if you have a loved one in the facility, you're a lot more likely to make headway. But if Wisconsin's anything like Illinois, there's actually no law saying, like there's a list of, you know, seniors' rights or rights of people in assisted living, and the right to vote is not one of them. So it's not listed. I think everybody has a right to vote. It's actually not listed in the Constitution either. But the facility can turn around and say, like, well, the burden's on the family to figure out how to get the person to vote. So that's the reaction you may receive also. Just kind of preparing you. Any questions on that one?
Just a comment,
Uh-huh.
a stamp is a legal signature.
A stamp? Like if somebody has a stamp made of their signature?
Uh-huh.
Oh, cool. I'll have to bring you around with me so you can help add to it. So that's all registration. Now we're going to kind of move more onto the ID side. Any questions so far? What's time?
Well, just a general one, you can register anytime you want, right?
Generally, I think there's a period where, right before the election, where they're finalizing the poll books where you can't. It's like,
Well, you could face-to-face down there.
right, you have to go to the clerk directly. However, otherwise, you can register whenever.
And you can register electronically, or you can register at the clerk of courts, or you can send it in, correct?
Yes.
3 ways.
Yeah. Yeah, you can always go down to your local clerk's office and request they help you register. So,
Is that a law to go to the county? If you go to the county clerk's office and you ask to register in our county, you will be sent to the village or municipality where you live.
I heard that in the earlier class too, and I've not run into that before.
So all the other areas, if you go to your county clerk, they will register you to vote no matter where you live in that county?
No, it's your clerk, the resident that you are, if you're in a township or if a city or a county or whatever, that's who your clerk is, that you have to register with. Like, I can't register in Eau Claire County clerks, I have to go to town in Washington.
Okay, so your county clerk will not do it?
No.
Okay.
Interesting.
Burnett County will do it.
Because I think Dane County clerk will do it too. I've not personally tried, but I've met with him and he didn't seem to indicate that he couldn't. So,
Because in our area, the township clerk may work 3 hours a week, you know?
Yes.
And to actually
And that's
find them
terrible.
in an office is next to impossible. For someone working, for sure.
I think what it runs into is technically, now that the SRDs are gone, we're kind of in a situation where like anyone can help anyone fill out a voter registration form. So we're kind of all in the same boat that we need the copy of the proof of residency. But like, there's nothing, like I can take the voter registration form, and I could sit down with somebody and I could say, put your name here and put your social security number here and fill this out and fill this out. And then I can send that into wherever their clerk is. So maybe some county clerks are actually just helping them fill out the form and making a copy. Because if they go to register at a county clerk's office, they probably brought proof of residency. Maybe then they're making a copy, and then the county clerk is themselves mailing it to the municipal clerk. That's my best guess as to what happens, but.
Because I thought all the municipalities then sent their registrations into the county clerk.
It depends on whether if they enter the information into the statewide voter registration system, or they rely on their county clerk to do that.
Good point, yeah.
So what I'm finding is sometimes you run into a situation where something's not specifically illegal in the law, but it varies county by county and municipality by municipality what they will do. And then some places, I've even had like clerks give out misinformation before. I did a class in Racine, and she lived in a senior center, like an independent living in Salem Township. She went to the Salem Township clerk, and that clerk said it's now illegal to register voters. You can't do registration drives, period. And said that
Oh my God.
that person went as far as saying that they had an email from the head of the Wisconsin Election Commission saying you cannot register voters.
That was just fraudulent.
Wow. Well, registering is different from maybe helping someone to register, because you don't sign your name and make it official and finished.
The person made clear that they were going to have tablets, and they were going to set them up, and they were going to encourage people to register, and they were going to answer any questions the person had. And they said, nope, can't do that.
Whoa.
That was the night that I spent an hour and a half.
Oh.
No, that's a receipt, but I've heard there are some good stories out of Waukesha too, and Washington. So that was the night I spent an hour and a half reading through the entire statute of registering voters and voting, and I screenshotted the part that said any person may assist with filling out a voter registration form except for the part the clerk must fill out. So I sent that screenshot to the person and said, I also asked what would be I asked them if they were willing to go back to the clerk's office and ask what part about answering questions on how to fill out a voter registration form is illegal. And because to me that falls under First Amendment, you can help anybody with, as long as you're not filling it out yourself. I mean, it's not illegal to fill out a form for somebody, but if you're just answering questions, what's illegal about answering questions? So that's what I would have done if it was me, but it was not me, so I couldn't necessarily. Yeah.
A question might be elementary, but if you're registering someone online and they have their correct address on their driver's license, do you have to send a screenshot of that driver's license in with the registration?
No. So I'll usually gloss a little bit over the online system just because I don't have Wi-Fi, so I haven't done it myself. Help somebody else do it. So for the online system for registering, if your address is current and correct with the DMV, and you can register to vote fully online with no issues, and you don't need to send in any proof of residency. Because what happens is when you submit it, the My Vote system will actually talk to the DMV database, and it's verifying that whatever you filled in certain boxes is accurate.
Okay, thank you.
So it's talking, directly to the system. What the short-sightedness was with the online system is that if your address is not correct, you start to have some barriers. If you start filling it out, it provides a link to the DMV website where you can change your address. And if you're moving within Wisconsin, there's really no issues. I've heard it's very quick, actually, that it'll talk to each other and update it, pretty quickly. and then you can finish the registration. If you're not intending to change your address, so like my brother, for example, my mom wants him to stay at her address for like tuition purposes and for insurance purposes, and I've tried to tell her that insurance doesn't care if he lives at your address or not, but that's what my family believes. They don't want him to change his address, and he just moved from Illinois to Wausau, so he could not register online. If you're not able to like on the spot change your address to wherever you're now living, then you can't use the system. So if you're homeless, you'll probably also have issues. So like it doesn't necessarily work for every single person. It's kind of back to that, like 80% of people will probably have no problems, 20% kind of fall through the cracks, and that's where we come in. But that is definitely an option, and most people, if they're just looking to change something online, you can refer them to the website, and it's fairly easy to navigate. So I don't want to deter anyone from using the website. It's just we still might need to help. So.
Can you clarify that? I think I misunderstood. So if I have a Wisconsin driver's license with an address and I move within Wisconsin, you said go to the DOT to change your address? Is that what you just said?
So if you're on the My Vote and you're filling it out, it will ask you, is the address you entered that you want to vote at the same address you're listed under at the DMV? And if it's no, it'll let you go to the DMV website and update it right then.
And what happens when you update? Are you buying a new driver's license?
I don't think so. I didn't fall into that situation, so I didn't do it personally, and I've not seen with my own eyes someone do it, but I've heard anecdotally people who are able to do it with little problem.
I moved within town within the last few months and went to the DOT to renew driver's registration and changed my address personally at that point. I did not have to get a new license, and I don't even have to change the address on my license.
It's already in the system.
Oh, okay, so that's a huge advantage.
It's a huge advantage.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of getting a new driver's license.
No.
You can register to vote with your old driver's license, just update it. Okay.
Even if it turns out I moved out of the state for several years, if you have ever registered to vote in Wisconsin, the procedure is much abbreviated, much more simple.
So my boyfriend and I both moved from Illinois. He was there for grad school. I'm from Illinois. He's originally from Milwaukee. We had very different experiences registering to vote. He still had a Milwaukee license with his dad's address on it. So he uses that as ID in the polls, and he registered to vote online. I think he updated his address with the.
He probably didn't need a birth certificate.
Or we moved before. What did we do? I'm trying to remember. But he had a much easier time. I had to go get a Wisconsin driver's license because you cannot use out-of-state license as proof. Which you could use it to all the arguments they make of you use an ID to buy booze and buy cigarette. You can use out-of-state licenses for those things, but I guess voting's no for some reason. So. It was funny, I was in up by Superior a few months ago, and they had literally taken the list of ID that's acceptable to vote and said, like, here's the ID you can use to buy booze, and they had written in any state license is acceptable. So it's, yeah, so anyway. So this came up in the morning session that sparked an interesting discussion. So it's not actually photo ID, but I do like, since we're talking about My Vote, I do like to tell people that in Wisconsin, there's a law on the books that says every 2 years you have to, the clerks have to send a postcard to anyone who has not voted in the past 4 years. So that went out in June, and they had 30 days to return the postcard, and then they updated the voter rolls by August, so 10% of Wisconsin's voter rolls was removed, which is about 350,000 people.
Can I relate an experience with that?
Yes, please.
This was 2 years ago when they did it, because they do it every 2 years after each general election. I was getting them back from people in my district that they were postmarked, that they were mailed on a date that was like 3 weeks before I actually received it in my mailbox. And there were like
Wow.
3 of them that were that way. One of them, I was not able to get to the clerk before the cutoff date.
Wow.
The county clerk, she maintains the voter registration system for all of the townships in Buffalo County. So it's, and to make sure you're aware too, when people register to vote, I think a postcard goes out to their residents to confirm that they do live where they said they live too.
Well, it's not a confirmation, it's just acknowledging you've been registered.
I got a postcard that told me like what my alder was and what ward I lived in, but it was more like you're successfully registered.
But if that were to be returned, I'm wondering
That's
if
true.
it would be taken off the rolls.
That's
If it was returned undeliverable.
interesting. Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. So, we don't have to go into a ton of detail unless you guys want to, but we touched on the fact that Wisconsin, most of you probably heard of Crosscheck because that's been in the news a lot. It's like a voter registration database amalgamation of 20 different states where they make sure you're not double registered, basically. Wisconsin does not use Crosscheck, but we use a different system called ERIC, which is it's a pretty legitimate system. I've been researching about it. It's by the Pew Charitable Trust, or the Pew, it's like a Pew Research Foundation. And they actually use DMV records between the states that are kind of bought into this system. Were you a clerk when this was in place, by the way? The ERIC system? It's only been in the last like 3 years, maybe?
Yeah, I just was voted out in April.
Oh, okay. So it is kind of newer in Wisconsin, but it talks to other states, and like if you move to another state with this system and registered at their DMV, that it would kind of like catch that you had moved and take you off of the Wisconsin rolls. It also, from what I've read, talks to the Social Security Administration death index. So if you pass away, when you show up on this list, you know it checks it through multi-points, like Social Security, the last 4 digits, your first and last name, your birthday, so it looks at a lot of different things, which is what makes it more reputable than Crosscheck. So these two, like people that are moved, as long as they move within one of these 20 states that use this, and people that pass away are already caught. So why are there 350,000 people getting postcards in the first place? Or like who are the people that are affected by this? And that's what I find interesting. So if you're a person that only votes in presidential elections, you voted in 2012 and you sat out 2016 because you were frustrated with it, you got a postcard. So if you think about how many people that is, or say you couldn't vote in 2016 because you didn't have valid ID, you got a postcard. And if you think about living in an apartment, say you had registered to like the address, but maybe didn't have your apartment number on it or something like that. A lot of times in apartments, you just have a big pile of mail by the front door. So there's been reports of people who claim they never got a postcard. So if you missed the postcard or you just assumed it was some announcement or, if it's important, they'll send me another one, chances are you were unregistered to vote. So I think one of the most important things we can do is be like a walking PSA to tell people to go to My Vote and make sure they're still registered. Because A, they'll find out if they were unregistered, and B, they'll get more familiar with the site, even if they're just going to check their status. Anecdotally, I did, because I'll talk about it online a lot, and I found somebody online who claimed they voted in the last 4 years, never got a postcard, went to My Vote, and found that their status had been marked as inactive. So I tell everybody to check, even if you think you're registered and you know you voted, it never hurts to check. It takes like 2 minutes. So,
Give that address again?
Say that again?
Give that address again.
Oh, myvote.wi.gov. And I have a little handout. It's not official, it's something I made, just with bullet points of what you can do at the website. But I find that's helpful to kind of like pamphlet out, and even if you stand in front of a grocery store and just leaflet it to people. A, it's a good way to start conversations, and B, it can help somebody who thinks they're registered but were marked inactive. Luckily in Wisconsin, and again, I think the postcard thing is just an outdated law we no longer need, but we need legislators who would be willing to take it off. And since it makes it harder to vote, I'll leave, yeah. I don't think so we have same-day registration in Wisconsin, which is a little bit of a protection. So if you were taken off by mistake and you go to your polling place and they don't have you in the poll book, you can re-register at the poll right then, which I don't think everybody knows. So like that's another good thing to tell people. So if you're one of the people that has a driver's license with your current address, that's all you really need to re-register. And so most people are okay, but again, if you say are using a passport to prove who you are and that doesn't have an address in it, you know, you're gonna have to go home and get a piece of mail, or hope that like you can pull something up on your phone that the person will accept, because that's another thing that varies, I'm finding, by municipality, is if you can use an online document to register same day at the polls. And I don't think that's something there's a law for or against, so it's kind of up to the person. So yeah, so that's my plug for that one. So. So what went around were 2 forms that kind of list out photo ID that's acceptable for voting in Wisconsin. That's one that I tell people to take with them. So if you think there's any question that your ID is acceptable and it's on this list as acceptable, I've told people to take this with them to the poll and say, look, here's my case right here on this form from the Election Commission. This says I can vote using this ID. And that's where it has the info that says you can vote on an expired ID back to the last general election. The second form is from the League of Women Voters. I like that one because, again, it's pretty clear. And that one specifically says you can vote using an ID that does not have the correct address. So if you have like a student whose address is not correct, and I've heard cases of election officials turning people away because their ID was not correct, the address was not correct. I've told people, take this with you. I mean, I think it never hurts. Or to tell them to pull it up on their phone, say, here's the Election Commission website, and this says I can use this to vote. It's a little harder to argue with that. So again, it kind of like depends on who's the election official at that polling place sometimes, and how well informed they are. So, but those 2 forms are pretty helpful. I think at, oh yeah.
I have a question about like, the lower left corner on the acceptable photo ID handout. If you have a student ID card and enrollment verification, so is that like,
yeah, well,
like a schedule, or like I can prove to I'm in college? Okay.
So, yeah, so student ID, that's like its own like exception. So for this, so I actually just started at UW-Madison, so it's my opportunity to kind of live the system. So I tried to scout around. The enrollment verification is something that you get to through your like online student center. So you like go into where you can like sign up for classes and or print your tuition statement. If you dig around for a while, it took me a while to find it. There's like a little button that will be enrollment verification. You can also get it printed from like most offices. The WISC card, you'll have students that think since there's a photo on it, they can vote with it, and that's not the case. I think some student IDs, some technical colleges, they might have acceptable photo IDs. The rule is it has to expire within 2 years of being issued. So you can see on the one here, it has an expiration, it has an issue date and expiration date. I know for UW-Madison, it expires in 5 years, so they cannot be used to vote. So if you locally have a student and ask to see their ID, like that's one thing you can check. because I don't know if that varies campus to campus. I don't know if some of the technical colleges I think have issued them this way now. And then the other barrier is you have to have a spot where you can sign the card, which I know the UW-Madison does not. So if you think of the back of a credit card, and that would be, I mean, think about how easy that would be to add, just a little spot to sign, but yeah, so that's what keeps, and again, I don't know if campus by campus it varies, but I know that's what keeps ours from being acceptable to use. So this isn't even like a WISC card. So you have to go get a special ID from your campus that's only used for voting. So you can't, so this is not just a typical WISC card. So, so you get this.
Student ID is basically it.
It depends if your student ID meets the requirements or not. I would say if UW is consistent, that none of the UW ones are acceptable. And this is.
So universities are issuing special student voter IDs?
You have to request it though, yeah. So I made some UW person very miserable one day when I got my WISC card a couple weeks ago. I asked if I wanted to get a student ID card, how would I go about doing that? And they said, well, you have a driver's license, you don't need one. I said, well, I know, but I help other people register to vote. And they said, well, you live in Wisconsin, so you aren't eligible for one, which is not correct. So I pointed out that it's for any student. They don't have to be just an out-of-state student. The person did not know that. And I pointed out that there's lots of people in Wisconsin that don't have driver's license, don't have IDs when they're 18, and they also need one. And they were like, well, okay, that's a good point. So I never got an answer of where I would go to get one. That person kind of started, for some reason, wanting to hurry me along at that point. So I noticed they had a stack of information on voting behind their counter, so I asked for one, and it was like moderately outdated. So it still mentioned SRDs, it didn't mention my vote, it referred to the GAB, which isn't the end of the world because all of their website, all the GAB websites just automatically redirect you to the WEC websites. That's the old Wisconsin Election Commission, which if you guys probably know that. So there was something else that was wrong on it. I did send a copy of that to the Election Commission, so hopefully they fix it. But I mean, we had a spring primary and elections since that information was accurate, so that's what they've been giving out to students for a little while now, and that's just one campus. So if you guys know students that don't mind being undercover, I guess, you can send them through the process and see how hard it is to get an ID. Because I know I've heard the argument, well, students just need to not be lazy, they should just go get IDs, but the process is apparently fraught with misinformation, and it's hard to find out exactly what to do. So students, I'd say students need a lot of, not that they need a lot of help, but there's a lot of room for them to be misinformed. Because a lot think their WISC card's acceptable. I had somebody in my group who tried to vote with a WISC card and ended up having to leave the polling place, run home, get their passport, and go back to vote. There was posters on campus apparently that said, tomorrow's the last day to get your student ID, your student voting ID, and then there were people who had valid Wisconsin driver's license who thought that they needed a special student ID to vote, so they didn't vote because they missed the deadline for that. So it's just a big area where there's room to assist.
So you can have the Wisconsin ID or driver's license as long as the address doesn't have to be correct. It's an okay photo ID.
Yeah, so a lot of
misconception, I think, for a lot of people.
Definitely. I'd say the biggest two are the expiration date and the address on it. And I think it's true in the polling place as well, because we've had people go, I've talked to people who were turned away because their address was wrong.
Yes.
And they were just voting, they weren't registering there. So if you have students, it's especially true for students, because if they move, from Green Bay or Appleton or whatever, and they have a Wisconsin ID or license, they can still use that to prove who they are at the polls. So
Just as an FYI, in this area, we have a lot of Minnesota students. They can't use their Minnesota driver's
Correct. You cannot use out-of-state ID though. So that happens too, is they register here and then they show up with an out-of-state ID and they also cannot vote. So there was a number of laws when they tried to change all this stuff that the state legislature tried to put these laws in place, and they were instantly taken to court that they were unconstitutional, and there's a lot that are actually still in
Litigation.
yes, going back and forth, up and down over like different court systems. I think originally it was 10, you had to be at a location for 10 days to establish residency, and they tried to make it 28 days, and that was taken to court by One Wisconsin Institute, and right now it's in favor of 10 days. And if you look at the laws on the legislature website, it has like a footnote, currently 10 days, and due to this court case. There's also, what time is it? I just want to make sure I'm not going way over.
3:35.
Okay. There's also a lot of things that can be done around early voting, and that's another thing that's being litigated. So there was an attempt to make it so you could only have one early voting location per municipality. So the justification was it's not fair if Madison gets 8 early voting locations and Salem gets 1. That's not fair. So every municipality, according to this law they tried to put, that was attempted to be put in place, only gets 1, regardless of size. So Milwaukee would have the same as Superior. So that's being litigated, and currently it's in favor of having multiple ones, and it also looks like it will stay in favor of that. One thing we can do to help is the more cities and locations that take on early voting locations outside of just the municipal clerk's office, the more it shows Wisconsin residents want early voting in multiple locations, and the harder it becomes to turn over.
Who authorizes multiple early voting locations?
So that's a project, the Wisconsin Progressive Alliance, the group I'm with, is trying to kind of expand on. So that is one of the main reasons why Madison did not have a drop in turnout, is because they put early voting in every library. They had an early voting location on UW campus, and the east side didn't have a library, so they put it in like an electric building or something like that, like where you go to pay your electric bill. So what they had to do, and Mary Beth is fantastic, and she tries to make it so any person that wants to can vote. Our alders had to pass a resolution that any municipal building, any municipal worker was considered an extension of the clerk's office. So that counted librarians, that counted DMV workers, that counted people at MG&E. What's your gas utility up here?
Excel.
Yeah, so for us it's Madison Gas and Electric. So in Madison, if you go to pay your electric bill, and coincidentally you'll have proof of residence with your electric bill, that person is authorized to register you to vote, or to sign off that you had proof of residency, and help you through a form. Every librarian, when you go to fill out a library card, is authorized by the statute to it's a resolution, I think is what it is.
But is it municipal resolution?
Yeah. They told me it can't be passed county level. So it would have to be municipality by municipality.
So I guess my question was, if Eau Claire wanted multiple early voting locations, who would be able to authorize that?
So my understanding is your city council has to pass this resolution.
Is there any possibility of getting a copy of it?
Yeah. So what I do after most of my classes is, if you signed up on the list, I email kind of here's some websites, and the resolution is usually one of them. So the alders pass this resolution, and then whatever interested parties or group can usually work with your library and your city clerk to get everything together that you would need to do early voting in the libraries. And my clerk is willing that if you run into barriers, if it's, well, it won't work for this reason, it won't work for this reason, you can contact her or you can send it to me and I'll forward it to her and she'll explain why it is allowed or it is possible or what they did. So for example, one of the main things, because I've talked to a few people, so like Racine and Kenosha and Janesville, like a few different cities about this. One of the most common things is, well, it'll be too expensive, we don't have this in our budget. So if you happen to have, I don't know, a bunch of former SRDs that really like helping people vote, who are willing to sign up as volunteers to be election officials, all you need is a couple of election officials in the library they're basically helping people fill out absentee ballots and then they fold it up and send them in. So if you guys ever find a bunch of election officials around here, or SRDs around here who wouldn't mind volunteering, you can get like a list. You could get a list and take it to your clerk and say, here's 5 to 10 people who are willing to, for free, help with early voting in the library. What's the next thing? What's the next reason why this doesn't work? And then each reason you find a way to make it work until they're convinced. So, but yeah, Madison in 2016 had the most absentee ballot, because early voting is it's in-person absentee ballots. That's all it is. So Madison had the most absentee ballots ever. I think they had about 66,000, and 78% of them were from early voting.
So we have a much shorter period for early voting in Eau Claire than you have in Dane County. What accounts for that? How does that change?
So you mean you can only do it like?
The municipal clerk determines how much time there will be for early voting. Like Town of Washington, which is a huge township, I think had 10 days.
Interesting.
Not really, it's pretty close.
I think
Yeah.
I think it is. I know there's like some state level ones, and that's what's being litigated. So I don't know if maybe you were just caught in one of the flip flops on that. Because for what they were trying to put in place is that you can only do it like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, which kind of takes away one of the benefits. Because Saturday early voting, even if you did like 4 Saturdays in a row, early voting in the library, you'd catch so many people who are working on election day. So I don't know if it was either just the law was going back and forth and you got caught in the wrong time, or if it's determined municipality by municipality or county by county.
It may have been something to do with the ability of human resources. People were able to do it, staff the office, as I recall, wasn't it?
Yeah, was it?
It was a window of time for Town of Washington, and everybody else in this area, Altoona, City of Eau Claire, et cetera, had the longer time, but she said she had the ability to reduce that time because they didn't have the human resources, but she had the authority, she said, to reduce that time.
And it's possible that there's like there's general numbers set up in the state statute, and then there's like a clause that says this may be altered by municipal determination or something, but that's kind of like the hard part is a lot of things can be determined at the municipal level, and there's like 1,800 different municipalities, and each one has their own clerk.
So Beth, you said that the changes occur in January in these regulations, if they're going to occur.
No, that's when the SRD and the My Vote occurred. So that's just when that one particular occurred. There's not like a general.
Okay.
Like the court case could get decided tomorrow or like a month from now.
So how do we keep updates? I mean, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't be this familiar with this information to know that some small thing had changed. And is there a general way that these updates can be?
So what I've tried to set up, and this is another thing I send out by email, is there's a communication app called Slack. It's basically a messenger channel. And so I've personally set up one that's just for anybody interested in voting in Wisconsin. And it's nonpartisan. And so you need like, I email a link and then you follow the link to sign up and join. And so when my goal with it was that if somebody found like something that had changed, like say they caught it in the news or clerk told them, you can post it in this communication channel, and then anyone else in the channel will see it and be updated. So that was kind of my goal. So that's in place. I can send that around, and people can sign up and join. A lot of times there's not too much chatter. Just people will post news articles. Like, we post news articles of relevance to voting in Wisconsin, or the Voter Integrity Commission federally. But it also has the potential. There's like these channels on the side, so you can kind of, they're like themed, if you kind of think of it that way. So I have one for like student voting, so anyone interested in helping with student voting can talk in that area. Well, I went to the UW campus here, and this is what I found. Okay, I went to the one in Parkside, and I found this, and you can kind of develop like working teams around that. I also have little channels by county, so if you wanted, I have one for Chippewa Valley. If people join, they could say like, I'm having a drive on Saturday and I need volunteers, and it would be posted to anyone else who had signed up for that channel. So that's what I've set up. Otherwise, you could check the Election Commission website like a nerd all the time.
I'm just wondering, it does seem to me that a lot of what you've said today seems very specific to your clerk, such as how far will they, is the organization willing to go into that area? And that's what you're intending to do with?
Yeah, we actually have, we have actually a meeting with the Eau Claire clerk in October.
Okay.
Just a meet and greet type of thing.
And so the changes can come locally through your organization as well? Things that would be...
Yeah, not that we're an organization per se, but yeah, I mean, just I think we're wanting to develop relationships where they know us and we know them, and the lines of communication are open and friendly, and
But you're saying, can we put that out there to everyone else? So we find out from the clerk,
I see.
like, oh, here's this law, and then we can put out to the masses, here's the new law, or here's the, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I'm asking.
like, get the
Right.
information out.
Yeah.
I mean, we could look at.
Or
the
like
Slack
locally,
thing,
that's,
Yeah, local, what's relevant to, yes.
us.
so that
Because then
way,
the
yeah.
other thing you can do is if you get like 5-10 people from Washington who want to change it, you can go door to door with a petition saying we want more than 10 days of early voting, and you can take it to the clerk. And my recommendation, and this is just in general, is that like anytime you want to change something, if you also present a way you're willing to help make sure it's successful, you're more likely to get it to take effect. So if you say like, well, we want this, but the reason it was cited that it wouldn't happen is because there's not enough staff. Here's 10 people willing to volunteer who are like committed. Here's their phone numbers. Here's their emails. So yeah, but I know for like the resolution to pass the city council, what we've talked to some areas is if they get pushback to then start a petition locally and say, hey, you're an elected position, and here's 100 people in your district that are willing to vote against you if you aren't interested in this because we really, really want this. So, I mean, it's kind of like the people power that is what a lot of these groups exist for. So, yeah. So, that's the early voting tangent. But any questions on the ID forms, the two I had?
It's quarter to 4, just so you know.
Okay. So then we have a couple more. I don't know if you just want to give these out at the same time. So what I have coming around now is the top one is how to get free ID to vote. So you'll run into people that are living paycheck to paycheck, and getting a new ID to vote may not be within their means. And when all this stuff went through the courts, it was determined that forcing someone to buy an ID just to vote was a poll tax, effectively. So Wisconsin had to make a way to provide free ID for voting. So that paper walks you through kind of the process. It also kind of tells you what to do if the person doesn't have a birth certificate. You basically gather whatever you have, you take it in. In those court cases, what people were running into is that they needed to get ID and they didn't have their birth certificate, or their birth certificate was spelled wrong, or you know, like junior was put as their middle name on the birth certificate, but a postfix on their license. And they were being blocked from getting what they needed to vote. So one of the court cases said that the DMVs had to provide something people could use to vote at the polls within like 6 days of the application. And sometimes what they'll print out is just that, like, if you've ever had a temporary license while you're, you've applied for a license and they have to like print it off site. It's that piece of paper you would drive around with until your real license arrives. So sometimes they'll print that out for voting in the time it takes to get the real one. So within 6 days, they need to at least provide you that paper. The DMV got in trouble because they weren't following that. So this basically tells you what the expectations of the DMV are and how you should be able to go through. You may run into people who have tried and run into trouble with the DMV. And that's another way people like us can help, is sometimes if you have somebody more knowledgeable in the laws, you can go with the person to the DMV, talk them through what they need, troubleshoot issues at the DMV with them, and just generally help out. So in Dane County, we have a Dane County ID Coalition, and it's a partnership between the NAACP and the League of Women Voters of Dane County. And they basically just have a group of volunteers with like a cell phone they pass around that's like the ID hotline. So you'll call, whoever has the phone will answer questions. They will come pick you up, take you to the DMV. They'll stay with you at the DMV. They'll help you. They'll basically just stay with you until you get something to use to vote. So that's what's worked for us.
Is there a time limit on the free voter ID?
Like how long it's effective for?
Yeah.
But does it expire?
So that paper, I think you hold on. It's just like when you're trying to get a real license. They have to give you that paper within 6 days, and then you keep that until you eventually get a license.
Yeah, but what if you don't eventually get a license? Many individuals who don't have any of this stuff don't get a license.
I don't know if that paper expires or not. You're supposed to be using that. You're supposed to use that only for voting. So
I know, but
I don't know.
So you vote in November and then in April, could you use that same one, or do you? That's all.
That's an interesting question. I think in theory, eventually you're supposed to get the actual plastic license, and they're not supposed to like hold it up for an unreasonable amount of time.
It's the birth certificate and some of these other things that hold it up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of the cases that I've heard of people having trouble, it's because the birth certificate had a spelling error or spelled wrong, or just, again, it's seniors. I was talking to somebody just out at an event whose parents moved here from Florida. They both had to mail away for their birth certificates to get an ID in Wisconsin, and they only needed it to vote. They were at assisted living facility. The dad got his, but the mom then needed to get a marriage certificate because the birth certificate had her maiden name on it, of course. Hers did not arrive in time, so neither of them voted because the husband refused to vote without her. So neither of them could vote in 2016.
But there's also costs associated with getting those documents.
Mm-hmm. So this group is supposed to help you through that. So
that's great.
So that's one thing that helps. And then I handed out the little thing I use for my vote. It's bullet points of what you can do on that website. There is one error on it. At the time I made it, there was not 2 declared candidates for the state Supreme Court, so there wasn't a primary scheduled at that time. There is now a primary. It's in February, so that is, you can just kind of like cross that out or update that before you make copies if you're going to use it. I also have a digital copy I can send around when I send an email.
February what?
Yeah, I have a card. I want to say February 20th, but I also don't want to be wrong. So, and then the final thing I handed out was a paper copy of the voter registration form. I might not have. It's now updated on my vote, so it'd be like a Tuesday in February. I know that.
Got primary election day, February 20th, 2018. I don't know where I got that, but that's what I have.
As long as it's on a Tuesday, then the 20th is what I thought was
20th on
right.
Tuesday,
So.
yeah. You think that's right?
Yeah.
The 20th. Okay.
So and then the paper form, my personal rule of thumb is that unless somebody, say they have Parkinson's and their hands shake and they can't write legibly, or the person for some reason can't write at all, I make them write everything on the form, so that just because I don't want my name all over a bunch of them, so that if something's wrong, they can't be like, well, Beth filled it out, and I didn't tell her to write that. So my rule of thumb is I make the person fill it out in their own handwriting. It is good to put email on it, because I know like my clerk will email people if they can't read something or if something further is needed, but just some way to get a hold of a person, because say the address was wrong and didn't come up in the system, like how are they going to get a hold of that person to tell them they're not registered? So I always remember that. There are those little boxes where you would check that you're a citizen and that you're over 18. They're really tiny, so that's a good thing to point out to people, because if you don't check them, they can't register you. But yeah, I'll walk the person through it. And then there is a spot that if you are helping them fill out the form, you can sign it as like somebody who assisted. You don't have to sign it if you're just helping answer questions for them. So, any questions?
So you don't have to show your social security card, you just have to know the last four
Yeah,
digits?
correct.
You only need that if you don't have a driver's license.
Right, yeah.
Right.
I think that's pretty much it then, if there's no other questions.
So if they fill out, I have neither a Wisconsin driver's license nor a social security number, I'm forgetting what's the next step then.
They should have, even if they just don't know their social security number.
Well, it's just, that's right here on this little form, right?
Right, they're supposed to have one or the other.
But it says I have neither, so if they have neither, that's my question.
Oh. I'm not sure why that box is there.
I have to tell you, I've registered a bunch, I don't remember ever seeing that either, so I just went.
Huh.
With the hurricane damage, there could be a lot of people who don't have birth certificates available soon.
Yep. Yep.
So my point is if they check that, I have neither, do you continue registering them?
I mean, they should at least know their social security number, like, right?
I would say you would, because right here it tells you to not complete this form, so they don't say that up here. Down
There's
here,
like a
if
whole
you're
list
not-
of instructions on the back
You know
too.
there's no, do not complete this form, where they don't say that.
They
up
might
here.
have to, if they have neither, they might have to go into the clerk's office to like figure out what to do.
Just curious.
Yeah. So. We'll send her on the email if you put your name on the list, and then I'll make sure my email's in there, so if you have further questions, you can contact me, and if I don't know, I'll ask my clerk and do my best to find an answer, so. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.